The wrestling landscape in the 1990s was very different to today, with WWE, WCW, ECW and hundreds of smaller indie federations. You'd think it would have been easy for the very best wrestlers to rise to the top and be recognised. But let's be honest, life's not fair, and there are plenty of examples of underrated and overlooked superstars from that era, some of them not recognised as underrated until years later. Now we've got a bit of distance between the 90s and the present day. I'll give you my 10 picks for wrestlers who were not fully recognised in their own time. All of the wrestlers on this list debuted in the 1990s. Bam Bam Bigelow was one of the most talented big men in the history of the business. He appeared for WWE, WCW and ECW in the 90s, but he would only ever be given his due in ECW, where he won the world title. His mannerisms, his speech, his look, his aura, all combined to be one of the most utterly monstrous superstars on any roster. In WWE, he all but murdered Bret Hart in a match at King of the Ring 93. He looked like a real badass, and later he faced Lawrence Taylor in the main event of WrestleMania. So what went wrong? Well, the Clique were running riot backstage in the mid-90s and holding anyone down that they didn't like, and according to Bam Bam himself, they had it in for him and stunted his career in the Fed. When he went to WCW, the usual suspects were holding that glass ceiling down too. Only in ECW did he truly get the recognition that he deserved. In WCW, Bigelow was a breath of fresh air in his tag team alongside DDP and Kanyon as the Jersey Triad and as part of the Hardcore division. But apart from a feud with Goldberg in 1999, he never got the props he really deserved at the top of the card. While Val Venis was super over with the fans and had a job for over a decade with WWE, he could have been so much more than he was. His gimmick ultimately meant that he was a mid-carder for life. Venis was really good in the ring, and if he'd come around just 5 years after the Attitude Era, he might have been pushed in an entirely different way. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and his debut in 1998 meant that he was slapped with an era-appropriate gimmick in that of a porn star. His Intercontinental title matches highlighted just how talented he was in the ring, and WWE could have made the man a main event level superstar in no time at all. The problem with the character is it was explicitly a porn star. He wasn't just some towel-twirling sleazeball womanizer like Rick Rude. He was, in terms of kayfabe, an actual adult entertainer turned WWE superstar. Venis was not only good in the ring, he also had the exact kind of look that Vince & Co. loved to see, and he had charisma in spades as well. He could have gone very far indeed without that gimmick around his neck. Most of the wrestlers on this list had at least a chance in WWE or WCW. However, Steve Corino only found success in ECW during the 90s. If you are unaware of Corino and his work, believe me when I say that he is a masterful heel, one of those truly brilliant bad guys who makes you want to see his ass getting kicked at any available opportunity, thanks to his hateful promos and filthy heel tactics in the ring. During the final years of ECW, Corino was elevated to the main event as his peers jumped ship to WWE and WCW thanks to Paul Heyman's bouncing checks. Corino nicknamed himself King of the Old School, and he really lived up to that reputation as he poured blood against the likes of Dusty Rhodes in bull rope matches and having his ass handed to him against the likes of Tajiri. Corino eventually was let down by Paul Heyman, and when his checks started bouncing too, he secured a contract with WCW. But in a classic case of right place, wrong time, WWE purchased WCW just weeks later and didn't pick up Corino's contract. By all accounts, Corino fell out with Heyman in a big way, and as Heyman found work in WWE, that put a roadblock in front of Corino's chances in the Federation. Thinking back to Doink the Clown, it's easy to scoff and dismiss the character as more new generation era WWE nonsense, but Doink truly was a missed opportunity, both in terms of the gimmick and the man behind it. Upon his debut, Doink the Clown was a nuanced character, an evil clown that was closer to Pennywise rather than Ronald McDonald. Doink liked ruining everyone's good times, and his bipolar mood swings were written all over the face of Matt Bourne, the wrestler, portraying the character. Heel Doink was masterfully played by Bourne, who absolutely nailed the character and was really good when the bell rang. The character of Doink the Clown could have been a perfect main event foil for the babyfaces of the time, and Matt Bourne could have been so much more, either in or out of the gimmick. Unfortunately, Bourne had issues around drugs and left the Federation in 1993. The character lived on, but with a different wrestler under the paint and a face turn, totally ruining the gimmick and turning it into the laughing stock that it became. From the early 90s onwards, Dustin Rhodes' natural talent as a wrestler was obvious. Yes, even during that infamous King of the Road match in WCW. After standing in his father's shadow in WCW for a few years, Rhodes could not have moved out of that shadow any quicker than when he switched to WWE. The androgynous character of Goldust was like nothing anybody had ever seen before, and was a million miles away from either his own persona in WCW or that of his legendary father, Dusty Rhodes. The bizarre Goldust gimmick, which was neither male or female or straight or gay, could have been rejected immediately by the fans and bombed, becoming just another failed, ridiculous gimmick. However, Goldust ended up being one of the 90s most memorable characters, a gimmick that stood the test of time for decades after. However, despite winning the Intercontinental Championship multiple times in the character, Rhodes never ascended to anything higher than mid-card level. While the gimmick served Rhodes well and made Goldust an iconic, never-to-be-forgotten superstar etched into wrestling history, it was never destined to be a main event character. In that way, Rhodes was eventually hamstrung by the gimmick, and any attempt to move away from it either led to indifference or outright disaster. See the artist formerly known as Goldust and Seven in WCW. Lance Storm found success in ECW in 1997, where he proved to be a stunning technical wrestler in contests against the likes of Chris Candido and Jerry Lynn, and in his tag team with Just Incredible as the Impact Players. Even in ECW, Storm was never able to break out above this upper mid-card level, and when ECW started to sink, he jumped to WCW. He was one of the few bright sparks during the Russo era of WCW in the year 2000. Storm actually had some consistency unlike the rest of the roster, and it looked like Storm was going to become a new main event heel in the years to come. Storm won the US Championship, the Cruiserweight Championship and the Hardcore Championship, and was just on the cusp of getting pushed through that glass ceiling that was until WWE purchased WCW. Despite a wobbly start as the Night Stalker in 1990 WCW, it was clear from his time as Adam Bomb in WWE that Clark had the look and the talent to excel, but unfortunately he never really got out of the gates. Adam Bomb was supposedly radioactive and hailed from 3 Mile Island, the site of a partial nuclear meltdown in 1979. It's the kind of gimmick that fit right into mid-90s WWE. However, it didn't receive any kind of sustained push from Vince & Co. after his initial squash matches, with them even turning the natural heel babyface before he left the company. Eric Bischoff in WCW thought that he'd stumbled upon a brilliant idea when he decided to tap into the popularity of the Mortal Kombat franchise, debuting the inspired characters of Mortis, Glacier, and for Clark, Wrath. That particular idea failed, and Clark had the brakes put on him by the usual suspects in WCW shortly thereafter. His later tag team alongside former Crush, Brian Adams as Chronic, was pretty excellent as a big man tag team. However, that was ruined too after WWE purchased WCW and ended up jobbing them out to Kane and The Undertaker. Clark would never achieve any kind of mainstream success again, let alone at the main event level. For a time, Mike Awesome was the man in ECW. Towards the end of the promotion's life, Awesome was recognised for his insane talents for such a big guy, and between mid-1999 and the year 2000 he dominated in hard-hitting, brutal matches that redefined the word extreme. Awesome won the world title from Taz in ECW, and the future looked bright for the 6'6", 300-pound high flyer. He seemed like a no-lose prospect going into the new millennium. Big things were expected when Awesome joined WCW, but once again it was a case of right place, wrong time, as Vince Russo slapped awful gimmick after awful gimmick on Awesome, instead of letting him go out there and get over based on his incredible natural talents. The fat chick thriller gimmick, I kid you not, felt like one of the most embarrassing wrestling gimmicks of all time. The kind of gimmick that came inbuilt with its own perspex glass ceiling that was impossible to break through. That was until he was made to dress in tie-dye and come to the ring as that 70s guy. When WWE purchased WCW, he was turned into all but a glorified jobber. Those brutal 20-minute classics against Tanaka felt like a long distant memory in ECW as he opened Velocity on a weekly basis. From one agile and hard-hitting big man to another, Vader deserved so much more than WWE gave him during the 90s. Easily in the conversation for the best big man in wrestling history, Vader made a huge mark on WCW in the early part of the decade, coming to the ring in that terrifying mask and having thrilling contests against the likes of Cactus Jack and Sting, winning the world title on multiple occasions. So in the early 90s, WCW did recognise Vader's huge talents, and when he signed with WWE in 1996, there was a lot of hope that he would be one of the Federation's #1 heels for years to come, and it was a strong start as he was heavily hyped before his debut at the Royal Rumble, and later in the year he main evented with champion Shawn Michaels in a thrilling contest. Only problem was, Shawn reportedly didn't like him. The all-powerful Heartbreak Kid put Vader's push on notice from that moment on, and it was down the card for Vader, and he would never truly fulfill his potential in WWE. Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig was just magic to watch in the ring. Technically, he was unmatched, even by the peers of his day like Bret Hart, and had charisma by the bucket load, and yet he never really reached the heights of a world championship in WWE or WCW. Rarely has a gimmick matched so well to the man himself as with Mr. Perfect, and match after match in the ring, he proved just how perfect he was. Between 1988 and 1990, Hennig debuted back with WWE to memorable vignettes showing him being, well, perfect at various sports, scoring a hole-in-one, bowling a 300, etc. And then he went on a winning streak when he stepped in the ring. That workhouse title, the Intercontinental Championship, seemed made for him in the early 90s, yet Hennig deserved so much more. But it just wasn't to be. For whatever reason, Hennig remained at Intercontinental title level for most of his WWE career, and that's when he wasn't stuck on commentary. When Hennig signed with WCW in 1997, he wrestled for the United States title and got lost in the 1990s melee of the New World Order. The closest he ever got to the belt was a 3-minute, 50-second loss to Goldberg at Bash at the Beach 1998. For some men, true talent just isn't enough in the wrestling business, but nobody said it was going to be fair.